So I'm just going to do a really brief introduction of Dr. Landry. Roger Landry is a preventive medicine physician, author of the award-winning Live Long, Die Short, An Authentic Guide to Health and Successful Aging, and he's president of Masterpiece Living, which I'm sure you all are familiar with. And I'll just share a personal note. I met Roger in 2008, it was, when the senior living community that I worked at the time partnered with Masterpiece Living, and Roger came for a presentation. I remember the very first thing he said to me, he asked me if I had a good relationship with my grandparents. And I said yes, and he goes, I guessed it, or I knew it, or something like that, and had a big smile on his face. He was so welcoming, and I feel super lucky now, 12 years later, to get to work for him and also to call him my friend and mentor. So at this point, I'm going to pass it off to you, Roger.
Oh, kind, Amanda. Hey. And I think you were maybe the first, because I have asked many people that, because I find that in senior living, it's not a job, it's a calling. So, and usually there's for some reason, usually grandparents, but they have a particular affinity and affection for older adults, and because it's too hard a job to do unless you really love what you're doing. So I thank you all, for those of you who work there, and for the residents. I hope that you enjoy that kind of commitment from those associates who you come in contact with. Well, I'm kind of honored today. Thank you for doing this. We're all doing things a little differently than we have been before. I hope you had the opportunity. It doesn't take very long to read, but and then even better than reading, Danielle on our team has read this, so it's an audio book, and she has a voice like an angel, really. You can see behind her there, she has a screen that's almost like a heaven behind her, a picture behind her, so that's appropriate. So I work very closely with Danielle. She does our social media, a lot of our content development, and I don't know where you read. You didn't read it in your closet, Danielle. You had your studio by then.
Studio at that time.
Make the recording. But it's a beautiful, it significantly ups the quality of the book to hear it read to you by Danielle. So thank you for that, Danielle. And thank you for all joining. I want to learn from this. This isn't just about, me spouting out. I certainly wrote this thing. I didn't write it in a vacuum, but I continue to learn from people's reaction to the book. This is the short version, but I hope maybe some of you had the opportunity to read the full book, but that's okay if you didn't, because the summary is reasonable for the core ideas. So please be forthcoming. These questions, they don't have a right or wrong answer. I think you could figure that out. I raised them because I felt there was an opportunity to learn from these questions. And if you didn't notice, I added a third one for us to consider. And this is going to go wherever it goes. And maybe we won't even get to the questions. It'll lead us somewhere else. But that one, if you didn't see, it came just recently, because I just sent it to Amanda recently. And I was wondering to what extent this experience with COVID-19, and most of us being locked down in one way or another, or whatever our limited experience is, has this in any way, if at all, made us rethink or not think or connect with perhaps our roots as humans? So our ancestors, how they lived, our ancestors, what they experienced. Do any of you feel that this is potentially a way for us to connect with those experiences? Maybe, maybe not. I know for me it has. That's why I asked the question, and I can fill in any silences there if people have difficulty with the answer. So, with that said, the whole point of is, first of all, anyone have anything to say? All right. Well, book clubs are a lot of fun, like everything else that we do, and we have found out to be even more true when you're in the presence of someone. It's a whole lot better, and I can see reactions better, and it's more than the sum of the parts, so to speak. Just being with people around a table discussing topics, whatever those topics may be, and many times, if you've been in book clubs before, it has absolutely nothing to do with the book. Except it's the reason that you're all there. But from there, it's a social experience, which I think we all have come to know. If we didn't feel it before, that with the limited social experiences that we have now, that this is an enormously important part of this. All right, first question. So the premise of this whole book is that lifestyle is the major determinant in how we age. And when we pay attention to our holistic lifestyle, research tells us that we are far more likely to experience an aging journey that is one of very high function, where we basically compress our morbidity. Morbidity is when we're sick and impaired, and we compress that time. So you know the successful aging graph, it goes up, and then where normally in most of our society, there's this long, drawn out decline, predominantly decline. And with compression of morbidity, we stay at higher levels of function, maybe not the very top, but when we're hit with something, we bounce back and we stay at high function. So that whole concept, from your personal experience or for associates, for those you work with, I could ask, is that something desirable? But that's kind of a no-brainer. Who wouldn't want that? But I would like your response to that. But more importantly, is it possible? Is it Pollyanna? Is it giving us undue expectations? And with that, the same question is the term successful aging. What do you think about that? What have been your personal reaction and the reaction of others to that term? So live long, die short is basically a vernacular for compression of morbidity, and that has been associated with the term successful aging. So I welcome any comments. Again, is it achievable? Is it a reasonable thing? Is it articulated well? Does it serve the purpose that we in Masterpiece Living wanted to serve? All of that. So sky's the limit on your feedback.
I would say that my feedback, hi everybody, I'm Amber from Celebration Village Forsyth. I am the sales director here. I would say in terms of successfully aging, the book resonated with me in terms of making small, consistent changes. And I feel that I've personally struggled with, I'm going to lose weight and then I'll jump into the deep end, right? And so because of that, it's not sustainable. However, when, setting up a plan to just make something small and achievable, or using with the Kaizen model or method to it, is something that today I need to practice on, and in helping our family members do the same.
Well, thank you, Amber. You're not alone in those desires to make change, and probably shooting too high. We always do with our New Year's resolutions. And then we get disappointed because so few of us ever make February for a New Year's resolution and certainly achieve our goals. So, but I appreciate that feedback. And we'll be talking more about that, because I think that is a hugely important thing that we, particularly Americans, need to digest and sort of internalize, because we Americans, we only like the big, sexy, exotic change that we can brag about, and if we don't achieve that, well, we see ourselves as failures, and that probably does more to hurt our self-esteem, our sense of self-efficacy, that we can do things, and that is probably the most destructive part of it. Not meeting the goal, but how we respond to that and how we see ourselves. Teresa there next to you on my screen is a coach, and it major thing she always tells me, and I've learned from her that this it's not so much what you achieve or you don't achieve, but in a journey like this with lifestyle change, it's really about what is happening to you and how you see yourself and what's your mindset. And again, if you walk 10 more steps today, well, bravo! Get out the trumpets and the balloons, because you have gone in the right direction, and you'll probably maintain that. So thank you, Amber. So the term successful aging, as ever since it was first coined by Dr. Kahn, there has been an element within the psychology field and other fields that push back on it. And I think I may have said it in the book, but I don't believe it's in this book, is that Dr. Kahn, when he was helping us formulate Masterpiece Living over the many years where we were talking about what this would become, he was our guide, our mentor, and we miss him a lot. But he would always say, never use that term where someone is going to think there is successful aging and unsuccessful aging. It's about normal aging, which we see in our society, and a different pathway, namely staying at high function, like the curve says, and that is successful aging. Whenever there's a term that you can get pushback on, you can sit there and defend it and dig your foxhole and beat off all the criticisms, but you know that and especially as I'm getting older, that seems counterproductive. So we firmly believe in it. The title of the book is, at least the subtitle is about successful aging. But we're using other terms now. You may have seen our podcast, Danielle and Teresa and I, The Bright Side of Longevity. Just a compression of morbidity, being all you can be, a better way to age. We use many, many, many synonyms. And sometimes we do use successful aging still, but probably not quite as much, but you know what we're talking about. The concept is the same, and it's just, in certain circles, the semantics overcomes the concept, and that's what we don't want to happen in some circles. Any comments on that? Have any of you experienced that? Residents themselves or residents you work with? Anyone have a problem with successful aging? The term. Okay.
Roger.
Yes.
I certainly don't have a problem with it. One thing I realized in my life is that, often we'll say that when we die, we want it to be while we're in our sleep, or we want it to be instant where we don't know what's happening to us. So when I connected with Masterpiece Living through some of your presentations and really looked at, how can we try to control that to live long and die short? We may not die in our sleep, but we certainly can control some of that and make it more comfortable for us so we don't go through that long, slow decline that I was able to see working in a hospital with people coming in with chronic diseases much too young, coming in over and over again over a period of years that I worked there. So I guess that's my thought on it. I always thought, boy, just like many of us, if we could just go in our sleep or go quickly, have a good life up till then, it'd be wonderful.
Thank you, Tracy.
I'll just add something too. When I first started working at a community, I had a lot of people say, oh yes, successful aging, I'll get to that in a couple years. And then I'd have people say, oh, successful aging, I'm too old for that, And so there was this one group right in between that felt really connected. But I think what I think of when I think of successful aging is back to my grandparents, the whole time that I grew up, they had this giant acre big garden that they planted all their food, and they ate right out of the garden all summer, and then they canned the food and ate that food that they canned all year long. And they just always talked about eating real food before it was a popular thing to say that you're going to eat real food. And that they were active in the ways that my grandpa pumped water out of the pond up into the garden, and it worked through the motor of his tractor and things like that. And I just think it was a really strong message to me that successful aging starts today, and that it's throughout your life.
Very well said, Amanda. Didn't know you had such a rural upbringing. You swam in the same pool, right?
Well, I lived in a little bit bigger city. That was going to visit my grandparents.
Oh, I see. Visit. Okay. You still go visit them a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I still go. Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but lately I've been thinking in terms of successful aging. What does it mean? As I'm the oldest one here, for me, more and more it's a sense of when we think of SIPs, the four. I think a successful aging experience for me is defined by social connection and meaning and purpose. Those two things I think are absolutely critical for to be able to look back or to look at your current life and feel that it has meaning and it brings you some contentment. The physical part, keeping moving, and the intellectual part, I think those are very important in order to be able to navigate the world and be able to do all the things that you want to do that will bring you to the point of fulfillment and social connection. It doesn't matter, it's semantics, it's about lifestyle determining it. But I think if you had to pick one for me, and maybe different for others, at my stage of life, and it would be the sense of that this life is meaningful for me, and I want to get up in the morning, and the connection to people is it's critical. When I was young, I thought I was a loner, and go out in the woods a lot, and then the military said, "Oh yeah, you want to be alone? All right, you be alone." And during that experience, I found myself whenever occasionally I'd be able to go out to a restaurant, and a server would come to me, and I'd say, "Well, hello," or I'd shake their hand when you could do that. "Well, where are you from? What's your name?" Kind of freak them out a little bit, but I saw there was a huge lack there. So anyway, that's just a very personal note. Again, I wouldn't put that down that is the definition, but it is what it is for me right now. And the physical and the intellectual part are absolutely critical in order to experience those other two in a maximum way. You can do it like Stephen Hawking with very little physical function and a lot of limitations. So I don't want to undermine that at all. Which let's go to the third question rather than the second. We've already kind of addressed the second one a little bit with Amber, with a little bit about Kaizen, and we'll get back to it. But this experience with COVID-19, it changed everything for everybody, and you know that in this book that I didn't start out to do this, but it ended up that I began to think about our ancestors, because when we live 99% of the time a different way than we live today, that kind of sets up a mismatch. And so to understand how our ancestors lived is, I believe, very important. And that was the message I was trying to get through. And we're not going to go back to being hunter-gatherers, but if we know that the DNA traits, the things that are in our very DNA that we inherited from our ancestors, well, then perhaps we can creatively bring that into our life. You're probably guessing that I asked this question because I think this recent experience kind of stimulated that in some ways. And I'd like people's reaction as to just to this whole experience. Anything is on the table as far as maybe what stuck out for you going through this time.
I have something regarding what you said earlier, Roger, about meaning and purpose and social connection. I was really heavy on the meaning and purpose, and to me, when I'd socialize, it was kind of like distracting me from my meaning and purpose. And the biggest thing I think I got out of COVID, which was sad that it took this kind of pandemic to bring it to me, is like a fear for all the people I cared about. And it really helped me hone in on, I could spend more time connecting with people because that's part of the purpose too. So that piece of my life, I think, has become enriched from this experience.
Thank you, Danielle. I don't know how you could even get you more enriched, but I'm glad you did. You're my hero in many ways, Danielle, along with a lot of the other team members I work with. Anyone else?
Yeah, hi, Rod.
Yes.
My name's Brian from First and Main Assisted Living in
Hey, Brian. Yes.
So with the COVID experience, I think to a certain extent, it's caused me and actually many people that I know, and as well as our seniors, our residents, to really consider the potential morbidity of our life. Also, in a very innate way, my attention to survival was broached. It really was, especially early on when we didn't quite understand the path of this virus and exactly what it was and who's at risk. I would mention that, talking with our families and protecting our residents, protection is a big part of the instinctive, innate, real feeling that I've gained from this. So thinking, considering what our ancestors might have had to acknowledge a little bit more readily than we have in our lives, that certainly was a big part of my experience.
Sounds like a profound experience, Brian.
It was, it really was.
Anyone else?
I know for myself, it was interesting. It was COVID brought what Brian talked about certainly was forefront in many ways with me. And then stepping back and realizing, slowing down. I think our ancestors lived a slower life, not a much harder one, obviously, but there was time to focus on the things that were most important. And I think in today's world, there's a lot of distractions. So that really brought that back, the whole sense of connection, that we need to be connected to each other, even if it's in today's times from distance or over video conferencing or telephones. And then I think the final thing was just really realizing we need to look out for each other. And the simplest way of thinking of that now, it's with mask and hand washing. It may be with shopping for somebody who can't get out, who's more compromised. It may be just connecting with somebody to brighten up their day. So those basic principles that were always there in humans as part of our human experience were just kind of brought out quite a bit more in some ways.
I agree. Thank you, Tracy. It's beautiful.
I would like to add or comment.
Please.
I am part of the Masterpiece Living community at Peconic Landing in New York. And we started off with the committee early on trying to do something to keep everyone connected, and kind of, as you've all suggested, we all had such a sort of an unnerving, unknown experience with exactly what we all should be doing and how isolated some people could feel, because initially everyone just immediately stopped being near anyone else. And at least where I live, all immediately kind of off limits for all the right reasons. And so the committee started making phone calls. We just divided up the list, and it was a tag up with our neighbors. And it was lovely to hear some people were surprised, and they said, "Oh, you just want to know if I'm okay?" Or and others would open up right away, because we'd ask, "Are you feeling okay? Do you need anything?" And it was interesting to hear the variety of comments about. Mostly people were saying how nice they thought it was that someone was checking up. Now, obviously, Peconic Landing was also doing that, but to hear from other members, they had a very positive response. And we did that for several weeks, and then started doing some other types of things. But I think just knowing that other people who were here living through sort of the great unknown, and trying not to be fearful, but to be cautious and respectful of one another, and to act responsibly. My experience through, I have not been off the campus where we are since March 9th. And that's out of respect for my neighbors. I don't want to be the one responsible for bringing something back on campus, because we're COVID free. And that took a lot of work on many, many people, on the part of many individuals. And so I think one of the things that has come out of this is how aware and respectful all of the members of where I live are of one another. That to me has been an important part of this. People are out of respect.
Well, thank you, Jan. You're at a magnificent community with great leadership and great people. I always love going there. These are
Yeah.
profound. We've talked about the pace of life, which is, since the Industrial Revolution, just seems to be accelerating, and that's a big one. We've talked about, I believe, the sense of greater good. But to me, one of the major things that this provided in our lifetime, and I was around for the polio pandemic, and I was very young, but I watched my parents absolutely frantic and going through this. But I don't think in our generation, perhaps 9/11 gave us a little bit, a short one, of a totally human shared experience. This isn't just, our little community or our little organization or our town, this was the human experience. I had a friend who was an astronaut, and after being up there and looking down at the Earth, said he was changed forever as to how we looked at things. This little ball there, and we're all running around on it, and he knows that we're messy and we're screwing things up and everything. And but from that time on, he just looked at his life, his place, and all of these other all creatures, but particularly humans, just looked at it differently. And I was just on with the Eden Alternative, they did a Facebook interview with me, and they asked about this, and I ended up saying, that this is such a unique experience that we've had, that it is indeed an opportunity. Now, a lot of people really hurt by it, and Maslow's needs, some people are way up down there just fighting for survival. And my heart goes out to them, and that's a little different for them. But for most of us who just had our lives stopped, and we're pretty much at home, but not having to worry about the basic needs of life, and we start to think that this is a shared experience. This is something that I personally and I have absolutely pledged. I am not going to be the same person that I was when this. I am not going back to my life the way it was. And so that's just my response, because I believe it is an opportunity. Anyone else regarding this? The point, by the way, with this book is that I think it let us look at our lives and what we value, I hope. And those values, in many cases, come from, again, our ancestors and the way we live, this shared experience, a social network, a social contract, caring about the other person, just as you did at Peconic, and we did. And the role of elders in the community, very, very big with our ancestors. And so all of these things seem to come to the forefront because we had buried them, but they are very much there. And when we experience them, I think we acknowledge that we've experienced something very special. That's the way I'm looking at it, and I hear from others. But I'm absolutely all ears, even though I've been talking a lot, to hear what your experience.
Hi, Roger. I'm Lisa. I'm from the First and Main in Auburn Hills, Michigan,
Sure.
And I do agree with a lot of what you're saying there. I just wanted to kind of add on to what you're sharing, just to make mention that I feel like communication is one thing that I've really noticed some differences. I would say that the communication in general in society, but certainly within our community, has become more authentic and sort of poignant and meaningful. And by that, I mean, sort of pre-COVID, there's the highs and the buys and how are you, and we all kind of move on. And now I think, like you said, that social contract that seems to exist, whether we're at a grocery store or we're here at our community or with our own families, just so much more meaning to the communication. And I'm really kind of relishing that. I think it's taken me this, COVID, we sort of got into this world like mid-March, and I think now we're all able to do a little bit of hindsight 2020, a little bit, and so that's kind of my takeaway. And it's just a really nice exchange, communication-wise, with that person at, you see at the grocery store, or, here at the community, I'm sure many of my colleagues here would agree that, our residents give back just as much as we give to them. And so they can bring us up and kind of help us through, again, hearkening back to that social contract concept, which I don't know that I really felt that social contract piece really existed as authentically or as strongly as it seems to be existing in these times of a pandemic.
You see it, Lisa, in natural disasters. If you're trapped in an elevator with someone for 5 or 10 minutes, it breaks down a lot of barriers that are there in society that keeps us just with superficial interactions. And but it's all it is sort of scraping off the covering that our modern lifestyle has put over who we are, and we absolutely need that connection, and we seek it, but in a frenetic world, you just don't get it as much. So, well, I hope you don't. I hope it doesn't pass without. It doesn't have to make a change in your life. I know I will, but to not forget this, because it was a very, very unique opportunity for us to, and still is, and I'm afraid it's going to be around a while too. To look at our own mortality, as you said, Brian. I mean, I think we were all faced with that, particularly me in a high risk category. That what we value in our life, how I was spending my life. I spend most of my life traveling. Well, then I stopped traveling. I had to, and so what did that mean? Did the value of my life go away? No, not at all. And so it was an opportunity to sort of metaphorically blow things up and get down to the raw core things that make you tick, that you value, and how you spend your time. And those should align, what you value and where you spend your time, including the people. So I went to a friend's house, and she said, offered me to get a drink, and she says, we're good friends, so she says, just get one in the refrigerator. And on her refrigerator was a picture of a big pig. She's struggled with weight, and she's tried to lose a lot of weight, and that was every time she goes to the refrigerator, she looks at this pig. Now, what is that doing for her self-esteem, her self-efficacy? I mean, maybe it's a reminder, but I think there's some significant negative things to it. And again, as we alluded to earlier, this is what happens. So, Teresa, you want to give anything to tee this up with your coaching skills? When people try to attempt to do something and fail, or anything you'd like to add?
I'm happy to. We're bandwagoners, as Roger, you alluded to earlier. We tend to be on or off the wagon, but what if there is no wagon? Small steps, as you always allude to, and I love the analogy of just watching a baby learn to walk. They actually learn because they fail. They learn because they fall. And we don't watch them and say like, well, that one's not going to make it. We just believe they're going to walk, and they believe they're going to walk. They don't think for a minute that they're failing or that they're not going to make it. They just get up and keep going. And I mean, what if we all welcomed those learning moments, those like failures, if we want to call them failures, and because we learn from them, and just believe, and then all of that added suffering that we manufacture when we self-judge and we have no compassion, it doesn't get us anywhere either. So does that answer
that? No, that helps me. I hope it helped others. And what did Edison say? 10,000 times he was trying to invent the light bulb, and he failed and failed and failed, and someone said, how can you keep doing that? He said, well, I have discovered 10,000 ways that don't work. And so I think, and a baby doesn't have this negative mind talk, this thing that not only is a barrier to our improvement and change, positive change, but it's also an impediment to relationships, to being serene, peaceful, mindful. It's about quality of life, and it takes us out of the present moment, this chattering mind. And it's so often a negative chattering mind. And it just is very destructive. So with Kaizen, again, that's a good way to take small steps, and each time moving in the right direction, and realizing you can make change. Just takes patience, right?
I think we benefit when we look at what we want to become, whether it's, who do we want to be? What change do we want to make? What's the positive part of that? Rather than looking out of fear or the part of what we don't want, we don't want to be overweight. We don't want to be whatever the issue is, but look more towards what we want to be. Just like the baby, Teresa, I want to walk as a baby. So keep looking forward. And I think we respond more to that, and we can see those little steps we take in the right direction. And if we fail, we just start again, just like the baby. I love that analogy. But it's about looking at the positive rather than looking at the negative and the fearful part of, oh, I failed. Well, you might have failed this time in one goal, but what did you learn to move forward again, and how do you keep going?
But I won't have her change the pig to a supermodel picture.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
sorry.
it's just interesting because an ongoing conversation that I've had in my household, in depth and philosophical, is about whether people are motivated by the carrot or the stick. I feel like what you're saying, Tracy, is, go after that carrot, but there's a lot of times you observe change happening because of the stick.
Well, and I think that does initiate it. I think the research shows that the negative doesn't work for long-term behavior change, though.
So the carrot is what to strive after, what you want to become.
A bite of a carrot, not the whole carrot, right?
Yeah.
Right. But it's amazing. It wasn't my idea, by the way. I think Dr. Moore from Stanford actually went around and tried to find where do people have success with change, and he found Japan and found out about Kaizen and wrote about it. And actually, it's funny, but Japan began to adapt this model from an American. Teresa, you know who it was. You told me once. Who was it? Yeah, that's right. Deming. Deming was a organizational consultant, and he traveled the world to help with efficiency within organizations. And he went to Japan. They totally, they made it a cultural, national thing, and are still reaping the benefits of that, whereas we forgot about it. Of Kaizen, just small steps towards the change that we want. Just requires patience, but it's really about building self-efficacy and maybe a little discipline, but not so much that, but the self-efficacy. I can change. I have the ability. I have to be rational about what the outcome that I want. And if it's a kind of a big outcome, well, then I break it down into many pieces and allow time to take all the steps. I climbed Mount Whitney once, and once you get high, you can't take very many steps very quickly because it's really high and you're out of breath. And it was just about one slow, my wife and I called it the Whitney walk. So it's just one small step, but you kept getting higher, and we finally got to the top. But I was thinking, hey, I'll pretty much run up there. Oh yeah, no, that wasn't gonna happen.
Yeah, and I truly believe it's, of course, the small steps, but it's that mindset, having that growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And I don't think it matters what age. It's a funny book, but a cool book that I read my 6-year-old daughter. It's called The Bubblegum Brain. And so anytime she's trying something new, trying to make a change, try to learn something, before she even starts, and before I even start anything, I ask myself or her, do you have your bubblegum brain on? Are you ready to try and to grow and to learn? Or do you have your brick brain on, which is fixed and I can't do it, I'm not strong enough, I'm scared, I'm fearful. But it's been interesting that she understands that concept now. And because if you try to take even a small step and you have that negative or fixed mindset, it may set you back. But if you start with that positive growth, bubblegum brain, whatever you want to call it. I think it just makes it a little easier, and it makes those celebrations worth it. Those little steps that are great to celebrate.
Well, thanks, Kai. And Avery is a star. And in case you haven't seen it, we did well, I guess it's coming out this week, right? The podcast, Danielle?
It's already live, but the newsletter goes out Friday. So,
okay.
But it is live.
We in our Bright Side to Longevity, we've been doing podcasts that are related to COVID, and we thought we had missed, the younger generation. So we interviewed my grandson. He's 18 in college, but Avery contributed, and she's 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, 6 years old. And then we got some quotes for some other people. It was interesting to see what children thought about this whole experience. What my grandson said, much to my surprise and I was happy about it actually, is that technology at first was where it was at. Okay, no problem. Okay, we're doing technology, and then he became bored and disenchanted with the technology. It just wasn't of the ilk. It wasn't what he needed. He needed to be with his friends. And so he began to get creative about how we could do that, circles 6 feet apart and that sort of thing. But it sort of helped me, because sometimes I fear, as maybe some of you do, and maybe because I'm older I do, that technology will attempt to suppress and overwhelm our basic human need to be with others in their presence. Technology helps us in a void to do that, and expands our possibilities of touching people, and it's all very good, but in no way can it substitute for what we really need. So I was happy to hear him say that at 18. Well, we're at 55. We have 5 minutes, Amanda. Are there things that you want to sum up regarding the next session we have, and or anything?
Actually, I'll let Tracy do that.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate everybody being on the call today. And certainly if you've got others in the community that are interested, you're welcome to bring them with you next week, have them join next week or the third week. It's certainly open, and I think this is the kind of conversation to have with Dr. Roger that you can jump in on at any time. So if somebody's feeling, well, I haven't read the book, or I wasn't at the first session, please don't let that be a barrier. We welcome them. As you can see, the conversation's easygoing, and you can contribute and learn from others. And we appreciate all of those that did contribute and share thoughts with us. So we look forward to you returning next week, and feeling free to bring somebody with you or expand the audience here.